Hello, everybody. This is a male space, and today I have with me my co-host from my show, the Mansplainers, Dr. Stephen Baskerville. Dr. Stephen Baskerville, take it away.
Well, thank you, Bradley. I'm very pleased to have our guest on today. Bay McFarlane is well known among people who have been contending against no fault divorce. And she's also been tirelessly working for a good 25 years now, as far as I know, roughly on the holding the basically within the Catholic Church and kind of holding the Catholic Church's feet to the fire and making sure that they live up to their doctrine in spirit as well as in letter, and preventing them from running away, as all churches do, it seems like, and synagogues and even mosques all seem, when confronted with divorces or separations or family breakdown within their parishes, congregations, the first thing that pastors and the rest of the church clergy and hierarchy and rank and file all do, for the most part, is run away and do nothing, and say, "Well, we'll pray for you, or we'll give you a, recommendation for a lawyer." So Bay has been, taking the church doctrine seriously. She's been taking marriage seriously for quite some years now, and I think her experience is very valuable for anybody that's involved in the gender wars, marriage breakdown, family breakdown, child questions of child custody, and also the moral dimension to it, which is the legal dimension certainly, which is of course the state, but also the moral dimension, which is the church's. The Catholic Church in this case, but all the churches or any institution that claims to be concerned with justice, social justice, or just plain old-fashioned justice. So, Bay, welcome to our the Mansplainers, as we're now calling it. Forgive the title. I might add one more thing about Bay. Bay, you've worked with instances, cases, to some extent, where the tables have been turned. Where women have been victims of the divorce industry by absconding or deserting men. And I might add, first of all, since this is our audience is most likely to be men, especially with our new name, the Mansplainers, and many men are well aware of women, feminists especially, who complain about the family courts, complain about the divorce system, and they say it's unfair and it's corrupt and it's really bad. And then you listen to them for a while and you scratch beneath the surface and you find that they really aren't complaining that the family courts are corrupt. They're really complaining that the family courts are not corrupt enough. In other words, they want the man to be kicked out of the family, and they want the children to go to them. But that's not where you're coming from. I want to make that clear to our audience. You're not a feminist who wants to victimize men more effectively. You're coming from cases, in some cases, where there really is cases where the tables really are turned, where the man has absconded with the children and left the wife through literally no fault of her own. In my experience, those few cases where that does happen are mostly cases where the man, for example, has connections with the legal system, where he's a lawyer or a family court lawyer or something, and he's got the connections to get away with it. So anyway, I just wanted to make that introduction. Have I gotten that right? My summary of your work? Did I get that correct? And
Yes,
anyway,
yes,
welcome to our show.
you did. And I do realize, whoa, I'm in a show called Mansplainer. Can I be here?
Yes.
You know, and because my entity is a nonprofit organization. It's called Mary's Advocates. And I've been doing it full time, just surviving on donations. I'm not making nearly as much money as lawyers make or anything, but it pays the bills. So that's amazing. I never intended to be doing this. It's like the job I never applied for. But people like what I'm showing and writing, and I work with both men and women who are defendants in no fault divorce. and the injustice is dumbfounding. For a lot of people, it's surprising and shocking. So, I have no, my issue is just what is marriage and having an understanding of what is marriage. And a lot of people who go into marriage with an understanding that's a traditional understanding are just dumbfounded. It's like, wait, I wasn't going to start raising kids with this person, whether it be your wife or your husband. You weren't going to start raising kids with somebody unless you had some kind of understanding of stability. I'm going to be with my children for as long as they need a parent. And you're not going to substitute me out for somebody else. You're not going to kick me out when I've done nothing grievous, like I'm not on drugs or I'm not insane or whatever. People go into marriage with that understanding. So I work with people, men and women, who are coming from that perspective.
Right. Well, actually, before we leave today, we should make sure to give your contact information and your Mary's Advocates information, website, and all that sort of stuff, so people can get a hold of you. Actually, why don't you just mention it right now, and then we'll mention it at the end of the show again, just briefly, and we'll put it on the description of the show.
Mary's Advocates, and our purpose is twofold. It's to support those people as much as one can who believes in the permanence of marriage. So anyone who holds that position, and then we particularly also dig into helping people defend their marriage in the Catholic universe, because you wouldn't know this unless you were a Catholic, that we have our own system of governance with laws and judges and appeals process and appeals rules. And I found that in the United States, the church governance is not doing what our governance system says it should be doing. So I showed people how to ask for that.
So you take the marriage contract and marriage covenant and marriage in the Catholic Church, marriage sacrament, seriously, till death do us part, which I don't know how many young people still do that today, but certainly people of our generation are shocked when they find out what goes on. The fact that the divorce, the marriage contract is not enforced by the state, and it's not enforced by the church, or it's not the church doesn't hold the state's feet to the fire and force it to enforce its own contract. And the church, which holds that marriage is a covenant, or in the case of the Catholic Church, a sacrament, it doesn't enforce it itself. So where are we? What is this? How did we get in this state of nihilism?
We know that a lot less people are even getting married in the first place. So why is that? Is that they think it's a stupid joke, and being married is no different than not being married? Why are people cohabiting? I mean, so many people nowadays, they grew up in divorced homes where they were going back and forth between two households, or dad was kicked out, or mom's on her second and third partner. It's like, it's a joke. What do you guys think?
I can say,
Well,
go ahead.
Go on, Brendan.
Okay. Well, okay. So I'm 46 years old, and I believe that this is the case here. I'm not going to say none of us, most of us, especially where I grew up and the time I grew up. I was growing up in the latchkey kid era of the 80s and 90s. And I'm going to say that many of the people that I know, certainly the people that are close to me, if I were to ask any of my friends, which I have actually, did your parents teach you anything about sexuality and marriage? How many conversations did you have with them about sexuality and marriage? And most of them, or all of them, will say nothing. Not one sentence. None of us were trained to be husbands or wives. None of us were given the reasons for marriage, actually. We just thought it was something to do. I mean, I'm married, I have 2 children, but I also have a grasp on what the purpose of marriage is for, and we could get into that. Dr. Baskerville and I have been getting into the real reasons for marriage. However, also what I see these days is that marriage is looked at through a sappy romantic lens, that the partner is there for enjoyment. The person is there to lean on emotionally, which obviously is part of marriage. You do emotionally support each other, but it's simply, for example, even saying that the spouse is one's best friend. If you get so-called bored of the person, why should you be trapped with someone you're bored with? There's no more excitement. A lot of the people in the Manosphere talk about when they relate in their relationship with women, don't be boring. And in all that talk, I could keep on going on with these twisted views of marriage. One would think, well, no wonder people do not take marriage as a permanent endeavor or not take into account what marriage is for. It is a very, also, I believe that in the 90s and 80s, that many of us grew up looking at entertainment in which we were, as men, exhorted to be clowns. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with comedy, but in the 80s and 90s, if you look at the so-called sexual comedies, many of us were exhorted to just be what I call, I don't care if anybody calls me a stiff or a prude, we were exhorted to be sexual pigs and clowns and to act immature in perpetuity, to be immature in general. So this, to me, really did a number on marriage, because people go into it not knowing what it's for and with expectations that have nothing to do with marriage. I mean, we don't marry to, I mean, we do have entertainment. We have recreational time with each other and with our children and people we know, but I don't think that the spouse is there to be an entertainer. Does that make, what do you two think of that?
Well, you're describing what the Catholic Church teaching recognizes and sees it as a contrast to reality of how humanity was designed. It's like, from a Catholic perspective, we were created by a God who has a plan. And if you break away from that plan, literally all hell will break loose. So if one goes into marriage thinking marriage is, especially from the woman's perspective, I mean, women are more emotional, more driven by their emotions than men. Men are more problem solvers in general. There's some on the fringes.
Entertainment and culture of the 90s, my personal experience, and it still is to the current day, is that there was this lack of training or education on what marriage is and how to be a husband and wife. So there was much a goofy, sappy, romantic view of marriage. And I believe that this view has tarnished marriage.
I think you're precisely right about that. I think even my generation, I'm a good 20 years older than you, but I grew up in a liberal household, and my parents, and I think most of my friends' parents, never taught us about the same, even the facts of life, let alone the purposes of marriage. A few Catholics actually went to church, and maybe they got better educations. But I think it's been, slowly over the generations, we've lost this, and we need to get it back. We need to do, I think, major research into some of this stuff, and figure out, like you say, where this came from, what marriage is for, why the church cares about it or should care about it, and why the state, what is the role really of the state, and so forth.
And this kind of explains perhaps why the no-fault divorce laws came into existence. Because if there was already these underlying currents where it's dumbing, I would call it dumbing it down, but if it's just softening it and it turns into, the reason for this thing to exist is to make me feel comfortable, appreciated, entertained. And when I might feel uncomfortable or not appreciated or not entertained or maybe bored, then I'm done. So if that's what people want, well, see, no-fault divorce didn't come into existence from what I've researched, and Stephen, you might be able to confirm this. It didn't come into existence because there was a bunch of public lobbying for it. We need no-fault divorce. Instead,
Yes.
It was a uniform commission of lawyers, divorce lawyers, maybe divorce judges. They were the ones that had their meetings over a couple of years. They introduced this proposed uniform legislation so everyone can have the same law in all the states. Reagan was the first one to sign it in California. So it was the divorce lawyers who wanted it. And I think it's a really great way for they to take money without doing any work. Because
Yes.
if I sue you, Bradley, because we had a contract about a service and you botched the job, golly, my lawyer has to get some evidence to figure out what you did to botch it. And then your lawyer has to try to defend you about facts. But in no fault, they just make money, passing paperwork back and forth. So you coercion and agreed to a coercion of how to split everything.
Right. And I
think that's really important point. Go on, Bradley.
Oh, sorry about that. You want to go first?
Well, I was gonna underline Bay's point. I think it's extremely important. There was no public push. There was no public outcry. There was no demand for this whatsoever, for the no fault divorce. And the striking thing is how little opposition it incurred. I mean, the famous story about how Ronald Reagan didn't understand what he was signing as governor of California. I mean, how easily he was snookered into signing this bill that he simply didn't understand. And the state legislatures were simply snookered. They were told that it was divorced by mutual consent. There were all these stories, which I suspect are bogus, about couples concocting phony adulteries and so forth, in order to by one of them in order to rationalize or justify the divorce. So it's very striking the way everybody was just fooled into this. It went by default. There was some pushback by lawyers and judges, actually, but they were ignored and silenced. I'm not sure how much of it though was judges and lawyers. Yeah, the National Association of Women Lawyers, the feminist bar associations, were drafting these bills in the 40s. They were waiting until the 60s gave them the opportunity. Everybody was looking the other way with this. There was civil rights, there was Watergate, there was the sexual revolution, promiscuity was in the air, sexual experimentation. So they just pushed it through. The door just opened when they pushed it. And if you look at it since that time, since the bill came through in '69 and swept the country in the 70s, and Europe in the 70s also, and later. The feminists have been pushing it on the global South nowadays, ever since. So, they're not finished with it. They're trying to spread the gospel of no fault divorce all over the world. And in many cases, it effectively does take part, even where it's not codified yet. It is effectively the legal practice.
And the thing that's notable about this, you were talking about how in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people grew up, Bradley, you and your friends, no one was talking about what marriage really is.
Mm-hmm.
For Catholics, or at least the traditional longstanding understanding of what marriage was, that made a stable society where
Mm-hmm.
people have some upbringing with you learn things when you grow up in a stable home where it's trying to train you to be a contributing citizen that's not a reprobate criminal. For Catholics, you can't just go sign up and make an appointment to go participate in your wedding ceremony. The Catholic Church has a system where the person who is witnessing the exchange of marriage promises, that person is obligated to do everything possible to ensure that you understand what you're doing and you're entering a valid marriage. And there's things that, you can't write your own wedding promises in a Catholic marriage ceremony. Like if you look at the old movies and people are saying a marriage rite, like the Catholic ceremony, it is pre-written. You're agreeing to certain things. It's for life until one of you die. It's open to children. It's good times and bad, sickness and health, richer and poor. And if you don't want that, truly, the person who's marrying you is obligated to try to get you to talk about what you're trying to do here. And if you don't want that, you shouldn't get married.
Yes.
And then then the church says, well, because we live in a society where the state has some governance over marriage and the church has governance over marriage, we still get state marriage licenses. So that like your insurance company knows you're married, or your kid's school knows, well, you're actually the dad of those kids because like you're the married father. But even now that's all mixed up.
Yes. And I also wonder.
Now,
go ahead. Okay, well, I
was going to say this. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, now we keep on getting mixed up. Wait, but hold the thought then. I just wanted to throw in there also that a lot of these elements of the sexual revolution, as Dr. Baskerville has stated in his articles, is that the public at large was not pushing for no fault divorce in the same way that the public at large was not pushing for the legalization of pornography. These elements of the sexual revolution, there were not mass movements of it. And if someone refers to the Catholic intellectual E. Michael Jones, his book Libido Dominandi, you can see that none of this was from public movement or public desire. It was people that simply wanted to alter society to their own benefit.
Yeah, yeah. It was an assortment of radicals. I mentioned the feminists as the spearhead, but I think there were um, other groups that were other. I mean, uh, people point out Herbert Marcuse's book, for example, and emphasizing the erotic and so forth, and elements, of course, of Marxism and so forth. So yes, it was definitely a radical political movement, which the atmosphere of the time, the culture of the time, was very permissive. But Bay, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that the Catholic Church does lay down these specific guidelines, and does if you're a Catholic, and you want a Catholic marriage, this is what you do. But does the Catholic Church follow this up afterwards when someone comes and says, my spouse is filing for divorce and I haven't given any grounds, I've been faithful to my vows, and my spouse wants a no-fault divorce without any grounds against me. I'm legally, faultless. But what are you going? What's the church going to do?
Well,
how's the church going to help?
We need to recognize the distinction between how the church defines itself in writing, official policy, doctrine, canon law. The Catholic Church has a code of canon law and how it governs itself. So what I've discovered and what I've posted all over Mary's Advocates website is what the Catholic Church is. But the challenge is the people in authority, like, they just dropped the ball. Like, something happened around the time of the sexual revolution, where leadership in the Catholic Church kind of just, I mean, some people call it an infiltration. Catechesis was terrible. So what I'm showing people how to do who are in exactly the same position you described. I work with dads. A husband contacts me. He's like, look, my wife is pushing me through a no-fault divorce. She seems to appear to care about looking like a good Catholic, or at least looking like a normal Christian, but she's doing this. This doesn't make any sense. You can't do this and call yourself a half-decent Catholic Christian. So I show people how to petition the church using our own code of canon law, asking for the church to do what the church says it's supposed to do. And it hasn't been as smooth going as I originally hoped, but I'm showing people how to do it, and we ask the church to do what it's supposed to do, but sometimes it's really disheartening. Sometimes the bishop will come back.
Has the church ever once?
Yes.
Do you know of a single instance where the church has done what they should do?
Yes. There have been instances where a bishop contacted, I hear from a husband. The husband's telling me what's going on. I show him, hey, you could petition the diocese using a formal petition. So I have heard of situations from the husband who petitioned the diocese, and he tells me, hey, the bishop is talking to my wife. He's talking about doing ecclesiastical penalties. It's like, you can't do what you're doing and go to communion. And going to communion for Catholic means you believe what the church believes and you're not in a state of grave mortal sin. And like, hey, woman, I mean, I don't really know what the bishop said to the woman, but the bishop intervened.
Did it work? Was it successful?
This particular case, I don't know. There was another case very recently where a woman's diocese remained silent when she did the petition, and then I showed her how to appeal to a higher authority in Rome. The higher authority in Rome wrote back to both the woman and the bishop. The bishop assigned someone to do everything possible to try to get that husband to work on reconciling, and they're reconciled. Now,
I see.
It's my position on this is that things are crazy in the government culture. Things were crazy in the 80s and 90s. Some things are crazy inside the church institution. And Bradley, one of the things that I gave to you before we did this was Father Rippinger, an exorcist. He gave an interview with Sean Ryan, and Last I checked, there was 2.5 million views after 7 days. Time where things are crazy. And that's a nice way to put it. The question becomes, what can one do about it? So from a Catholic perspective, what one can do about it is ask the church to do what the church says it's supposed to do.
So when the church exerts moral pressure like that up through the hierarchy, it can be successful. They can put moral ecclesiastical pressure on the wayward offending spouse and get that spouse to to behave, or perhaps knock heads together, if appropriate, and get them both to behave.
Right. And see, the thing that's one of the disappointing responses that people get is, like you said in the beginning, the church personnel will be like, oh, we'll just pray for you. Like, okay. There's another problem when a Catholic woman dumps her husband. It's caused giving scandal. Everyone else sees the woman dumping her husband and thinking, well, she's a Catholic, so if she can do it, I guess a Catholic church is perfectly okay with this. I guess there's nothing wrong with this. I guess this is normal. Oh, she was bored. She was unhappy. She didn't like him anymore. He gained too much weight. He couldn't keep a job that she liked. So everyone else who's viewing this starts to think it's normal. So then it becomes normalized and everyone just be quiet about it. You're talking about the church. What is the church is just quiet? They run away. The church runs away. And according to scripture, when someone's doing something that's contrary to good morals and helping keep our society running smoothly, like the church isn't trying to make people a bunch of slaves. I mean, Old Testament, when they follow the 10 Commandments, the outside countries noticed, golly, you guys have a really smoothly running society over there. Your God must be pretty keen. I mean, so following moral principles like, hey, let's have parents stay together and raise their kids in stable homes, or let's have it so you don't steal and cheat from each other. Let's have it so that adultery is not okay. Like, this is not bad stuff. This is making your society nicer. Father Rippinger is an exorcist, and Catholics believe there are demons running around, and demons bother people. Sometimes demons possess people, and when someone gets possessed, there's a special job in the church to help get them unpossessed. And Father Rippinger is one of these people. He talks to demons. Demons talk to him. He talks to people who are possessed by demons. And his perspective is something you're not going to hear in the regular media. It's like, we're dealing with evil.
I'd like to go back to Bay's point about the bishop, and that the church can intervene and put moral pressure on its parishioners, on its members, to behave themselves, to reconcile and so forth. Now, I think, first of all, I'd like to make the point that the Catholic Church is no different in this respect than any of the other churches. The Catholic Church at least has guidelines that it sticks to, but as far as its failure to follow through, I can tell you the Protestant churches, and from all I've seen, synagogues and mosques are just as bad. So the Catholic Church is no worse. But you mentioned that if the church does put pressure on its parishioners, it can be effective. But you've probably heard me say before that I think that the priests or the pastors or the clergy and the parishioners too should not just put moral pressure on, because you mentioned a few minutes ago that in every church, including the Catholic Church, also registers the marriage with the state, and the state has an interest in it. And no matter how much pressure the Catholic Church or any church puts on the spouses to reconcile or to behave themselves, the state can, of course, tear up the contract in ways without the church being able to do anything. So I think the church the clergy especially, should do more than just put moral pressure, more even than just excommunication. I think they should go into the courtroom and stand up for the spouses, or for the wrong spouse, if there is one. If there's one spouse, pardon me, who's being flagrantly wronged, and another spouse who's in the wrong, then I think the church, the clergy, should go into the courtroom and say, we have standing in this case to be heard. We consecrated the marriage. We witnessed it. we have standing to come into this civil case and to speak on behalf of justice, not just on behalf of God, yes, but on behalf of justice. And that's, that's a big part of what God himself demands in these cases. So, the clergy should, I don't think they should hesitate to go into the courtroom, point the bony finger at the judge, and say, you are dispensing injustice in this case. And that's not mixing church and state. That's standing up for your principles, and the same principles I think could be justified from a secular standpoint, from a Catholic, Protestant, or any standpoint.
As I get people contacting me, I often will look up the state law for wherever they reside to see what the state says about marriage, who can solemnize marriage. And some of the states say things like a clergyman according to the right of the congregation to which the people belong. So from a Catholic perspective, if someone marries in a Catholic rite, you go through this premarital investigation to ensure that you understand what you're entering into and you want certain things, stability. You're not allowed to separate unless there's a legitimate moral cause like grave danger, abuse. And then if that's what you're agreeing to before you get married, if the state law says you're marrying in accordance with the right of the congregation to which you belong, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not those exact words, well then you've just got your state law is saying you're marrying according to this system, according to these specifications. So then when someone wants to go separate and divorce, there is a secular reason, I think, to go to the state court and say, look, your own law says we're marrying according to this system. This system has these rules. We both agreed to these rules. You could agree to any other kind of rules, like a building code. And if you agree to a building code, when someone wants to sue you, you go back to the rules you agreed to. So then the person who's aggrieved, the abandoned husband, could petition his church saying, hey, look, I'm bringing to your attention, we have the separation problem. Then the church could go back and issue a decree that says, we done our investigation, woman has no reason to be separated, woman has no reason to approach the state court. Then the husband in this universe could bring this document to the church. He could bring the person who signed the document, he could summon him and saying, hey, you're my bishop, here's my bishop's mandated delegate who did this investigation and issued this decree, or you're my tribunal person. Hey, I want you to submit a written affidavit. And then if the state has all that, what's the state going to do? It's contrary to its own law.
Right. Well, what you're saying is the church's terms of the marriage become a legal contract that the state is required to enforce.
Or quit getting married in the state at all. If the state really wants to turn marriage into this stupid joke, let's just all pull away and say, we're not playing your stupid game. We're done. So we're just going to go to our own private contract. We're going to sign a contract with these rules and we'll arbitrate it.
But the state still has to enforce a contract. A contract, I mean, if someone's going to enforce a contract, it's got to be the state that does it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See,
this is a very popular solution by libertarians. Libertarians would like to see the state completely have no role whatsoever in the marriage. I'm skeptical that that's possible, especially once children come along, because if you're going to treat the marriage covenant as a legal contract, then there's no one to enforce it except the state or a shotgun.
Well, if I can have and they say you can't have a lifelong contract.
Well,
if we got married in the church system, agreeing to those rules, and if you decided to go get your state marriage license, another option that Mary's Advocates has on our website is signing something that's intended to be an enforceable prenuptial agreement. That's available on our website. And its purpose is to set oneself apart from the no-fault system, where you're saying our prenuptial agreement is designating a third-party arbitrator. And the third-party arbitrator is the authorities in the Roman Catholic Church's governance. So if there is a dispute...
Excuse me, I was going to say, in my understanding, though, prenuptial agreements are never, in any jurisdiction I know of, enforceable in court. Enforceable in court when it comes to child custody. child custody is the judge will basically throw out any provisions in a prenuptial agreement for child custody and do
Because
whatever he wants. Now, if it was,
the state owns all your children. It's
exactly,
disgusting.
exactly, it is. I agree.
Yes. So, well, what are we supposed to do? That's where it's a mess. If one did sign an agreement like that, it would be better than nothing, I think. And if the church were to intervene, at least the church would be publicly telling everyone, including the state, what you're doing to this man is unconstitutional, immoral, should be illegal. You're stealing his kids. You're making him pay for his wife to live in a household because she decided he was boring. Like, this is all evil. At least speaking the truth is better than running away.
Well, also, I didn't realize what you said a moment ago, that some states incorporate the terms of the church, the church's terms of marriage into its own grounds for divorce. Because, I mean, every state has its own, every jurisdiction.
It's not their grounds for
Go
divorce.
on. I was going to say that.
It's the section of
But
the
it would
law.
supersede their grounds for divorce.
It's the section of the law where the state is describing marriage and describing how one solemnizes a marriage. So sometimes when they're talking about how one solemnizes a marriage, it says you're marrying in accordance with the rite of your religious institution. So it's that part of the law. But then I'm just connecting.
Well, that still sounds like right. I'd have to see the wording, but that certainly implies that it's, the marriage is consecrated. The marriage is solemnized. The marriage is what's the word? Legally contracted, according to the terms of the church. And if every state, every jurisdiction has its own grounds for divorce, which is understandable. And it can vary, but it's, you have to know what they are. But if the church, if the state says that would certainly imply to me, at least, or that would, if not constitute grounds, it would at least, it might supersede the grounds for divorce. If the state has secular grounds, but then it has a clause like that, I would think that clause would supersede the secular grounds. But I don't know.
One of the challenges that the state knocks out the defendant one at a time. So a divorce defendant is in the person who agreed to share your life with you has now changed their mind. They're betraying you. They're submitting you to a state court that will take over your children, take over all your property, take over your future property. So that person is people lose weight, people can't concentrate at work, people are clinically depressed. Like, this is what happens when someone's a defendant in a divorce. So they're not prepared to even try these strategies. They have to have money to hire a lawyer willing to do it. They have to live in a jurisdiction where the church is willing to do it. It's part of the challenge.
Well, that's why I think the church should be the ones doing it. I mean, the church, a lot of churches have the money, have the resources, and no, you're right. The cost of legal fees is prohibitive. But if an institution like the Catholic Church or any well-established church were to enter, and many of them, like I say, they have the means to do this, I think to a large extent, maybe this is a question I'd like to ask you, to what extent is the various churches, abdication on this issue, on divorce, the reason that the pews are now empty now and have been for the last several decades? In other words, here's the one instance when the church is more than just a pretty setting for, more than just a Sunday social club. The church, is supposed to either stands for its principles, defends its covenants and its sacraments, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then why should I go to church every Sunday? Listen to what the hypocrites are telling me.
Well,
could this reverse the emptying of the pews if the church took a stand on this issue?
Well, it's kind of like the church is supposed to be the voice of God. Like, the Catholic Church believes that humanity was created for a reason, heaven, hell, judgment, and purgatory are like where we're all going to go. You can edit that out. Let me answer that question over again. I have a theory about how the church's silence on divorce is responsible for emptying a lot of the pews. Because if you're a kid who had a somewhat stable upbringing for a number of years, and then your Catholic mom dumps the Catholic dad, or vice versa, the church remains silent. And then what we have in the United States is no fault annulments. They're going to deny it. They're going to say, the church would deny this. But what I have found with the people who I help is that the woman who dumps her husband can go to the church and she can say, I was never really married him in the first place. I just was immature. I was naive. I just didn't have good discretion about choosing a husband. And then in a lot of dioceses, the Catholic Church does this thing, which is an annulment, which says you were never really married in the first place.
Well, then, what were they? What was going on if there was no marriage? What is the answer?
Well, they were just the woman
They're
was a
adulterous?
victim of her own naivety and her immaturity, and the defendant was just a victim. Well, he wasn't a victim because it wasn't really her fault. Because there's a scandal going on in the Western world that Pope Leo has criticized, Pope John Paul II had criticized, Pope Benedict had criticized, Pope Francis, I don't want to talk about him, that the leadership in the Catholic diocese, at least in the Western world, are giving annulments, telling people that you're not really married in the first place, so you can keep yourself in the pews, you can marry your new partner in the church, and then you feel good. I mean, and I do agree there are some grounds for annulment, like if someone is off the chart schizophrenic and they trick somebody, or the man who's seriously sexually perverted and he sexually assaults his own babies when they're born. Okay, those people have serious mental problems. Maybe they were actually not capable of entering a marriage. But what I'm talking about is the people who have 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. They're looking to everyone who knows them like a normal, half normal couple. And then one of them decides to go off the rails and, well, they don't decide. They're unhappy with their marriage and they believe the solution is we need to get a divorce. And then they hear amongst the Catholics, oh, after you get your divorce, you should go get your annulment. Your annulment is this thing where the church kind of blesses your divorce, so you weren't really married in the first place. This is a problem.
So does that mean the church is declaring people to be fornicators? Are they declaring people to be adulterers?
Well, they weren't
Sounds like it to
deliberately
me.
fornicators and adulterers. They were just accidentally fornicators or adulterers.
And their children are illegitimate,
Well,
right?
they say it's not illegitimate. I have a lot of problem with this. A lot of my work is helping people who were divorce defendants when they didn't do anything wrong, justifying separation in the first place. So I show them how to ask the church to intervene, to tell the divorce plaintiff, look, you can't do what you're doing and call yourself a Catholic. We are willing to try to help you reconcile, get the kind of help you need. Look, you're not the first woman who was disillusioned about whatever. You can get over this and be happier in the future. But then if the woman doesn't listen, and I'm using women, but it's both sexes that I help, then years later, the divorce plaintiff files for an annulment in her local diocese. I show the same defendant how to defend his marriage, that he's trying to say my marriage is valid. And the wife and the diocese is saying, well, you were just naive and immature and you had a bad discretion about who you married, which is totally not a good reason for giving an annulment and saying you weren't married in the first place.
This sounds suspiciously reminiscent of Henry VIII, right? I remember that one of Catherine of Aragon's defenses was that she was being declared an adulteress, and she was being, her child, Mary, future Queen Mary of England, was being declared a bastard. And so the Catholic Church. So I guess come back, Henry VIII. All is forgiven. I mean, this is very ironic for the Catholic Church to be going through this same charade that Henry perpetrated when he created the Church of England. Maybe we should have armies outside the Vatican, which is the only reason the Vatican, Henry VIII got away with it, was that his nephew was surrounding the Vatican and could have made war on them. So anyway, so I thought that's a cheap shot, but
no. I mean,
very...
back in King Henry VIII's era, the church leadership was willing to say, no, you can't decide that you're not actually married to your wife, and if you do, you're not a Catholic. So Henry's solution was, I'm starting my own church. Then I don't need you.
Right.
And I still think
no?
it's better to let the chips fall where they may. If the authorities in the church were brave and had courage to stand up for these things that aren't popular, at least not popular with the feminists. Because if the church does stand up for that, yeah, they might lose the feminists, but you know who they're going to get? They're going to get the children who saw what mom did to dad. And they're going to say, I'm experiencing a lot of difficulties. It really sucked to go back and forth between two houses. You know, my dad wasn't a bad guy. I don't like this. And the church is supporting the same thing that I feel resonates in my heart. So even though my upbringing is difficult, because I had to live through the stupid no-fault divorce garbage, at least the church is on my side. So maybe the church will keep those people and it'll lose the feminists.
Yeah.
And if they lose,
no, this is.
I mean, how are we ever going to get no-fault divorce to go away? The way it has been for the last many decades, Stephen, since you and I first met, there doesn't seem to be a lot of momentum as far as legislation goes. Maybe a couple of legislators are talking about it, but nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. So how is there going to be a public outcry where maybe the laws would change? And if the church would start speaking up and people who have half normal consciences realize, that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. The churches could do a lot if they have the time, the resources, and the minds, frankly, to think it through. I know when someone like J.D. Vance makes a negative comment about no-fault divorce or someone else, first of all, I know it's going nowhere. Secondly, I know pretty sure that he doesn't have a clue as to how to actually go about it. And you get these silly laws about things like proposals for a 6-month waiting period before the divorce is granted, and this kind of thing, which is completely useless. So they don't really understand what it is. But I think in many ways, I think one thing that we could be looking at is the way the no-fault system has not only destroyed many countless lives of men, women, and children, but it's also doing unbelievable harm, debasing our whole judiciary system. I mean, my argument is that no-fault justice, the very concept, whether it's car insurance or divorce, or I heard some other proposal the other day for some no-fault principle. No-fault justice is a contradiction in terms. No-fault justice is a principle for systematic injustice. You can't have it. And this is why it has debased our entire judiciary. And why, people wonder why the American judiciary is so crooked, so debased, so activist, so unjust in many cases. I think a lot of it could be traced back to the sexual revolution and what, its manifestation in the courts. So that's my 2 cents worth on that.
Yes.
As you're talking about courts, there is a man in Texas who has a constitutional challenge that's seeming to get somewhere. The guy's name is, it's in Dallas County, if I remember right, and his wife filed for divorce. Right from the beginning, he filed a complaint that the whole divorce should be thrown out because it's unconstitutional. And this has been going on for, I want to say, 6 or 8 months. In the county, 4 different times, the judges have recused themselves. The judge does not issue a decision saying why his constitutional challenge is wrong. They just remain silent. And the last thing that I just posted on Mary's Advocates, I heard about the case, is that the current judge is telling the plaintiff wife, we're having a hearing in May, and during that hearing, you plaintiff have to show me why I should move forward with this divorce case. Otherwise, I'm going to dismiss the whole thing. And on our website, we've publicized his complaint. So maybe other people in Texas could use the exact same complaint because all the state law would still apply.
Yeah, I mean, this might be the answer to your question. How do we do it? If everyone goes into a court like this and takes on the constitutional issues squarely, then I think that certainly can't hurt. As you say, I don't know what constitutional grounds he bases his case on, but I know that there's a whole smorgasbord of constitutional principles that are being violated. I mean, in my book, Taken into Custody, I go through the whole Constitution, not just the Bill of Rights, but you name it. There isn't hardly a major constitutional principle that isn't violated in the divorce courts every day. Things like basic things like habeas corpus, double jeopardy, ex post facto laws, acts of attainder, the contract clause, most obviously, the Fourth Amendment protection of privacy, the Fifth Amendment protection of due process of law. I mean, you name it. Even the Second Amendment, in some cases, the right to bear arms is men usually are deprived of their right to own guns by domestic violence accusations and protective orders. So, whatever his grounds are, there's no shortage of them to do it. So, it would be nice if more men and women were to do this, and we might start, establish a trend.
One thing he's doing is making an argument about how the Texas legislators have no right to make a law about a viewpoint discrimination, where the wife is saying in Texas it's not irretrievable breakdown, it's the no-fault grounds, it's something like unsupportability. Different state has different language for no fault. So I think Texas is unsupportability. So the woman is saying, our marriage is unsupportable. And then the husband's saying, well, that's just her opinion. And my opinion is that it is supportable. We can keep our marriage going. So it's one viewpoint against another viewpoint. There's no action. Another thing he's saying is that she doesn't have any standing, because in a court, the judge is supposed to judge facts based on action, something you can measure, see, or whatever. So the husband's complaint includes, look, I have not been advised of any wrongdoing of mine. How can you bring me into a civil court and take away my marriage and my money if I've not been accused of any wrongdoing?
Yeah.
So
No, it's crazy.
Due process? Would due process be no wrongdoing? You don't have any standing.
DV there?
Yeah, no, I'm still here. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's simply a self-fulfilling principle, isn't it? The marriage is irretrievably broken down or insupportable just by virtue of saying it comes to be true. Well, that's not justice. That's not a judicial procedure at all. That's just a bureaucratic rubber stamp.
Yes. And I have some questions also. Being that we've been discussing this through the Catholic lens mostly for the duration of the show so far, there are questions that people in our society that I've heard over and over again ask about no-fault divorce. One of them is, why should we keep two people together, keep them so-called trapped in a marriage? Why should someone be in a marriage that they don't want to be in?
Well, if you take out the Catholic perspective part,
I'll leave that to you.
I'm a professional athlete and I signed a contract. Worked for the company, for the team. I don't want to be trapped working for the team.
Yes.
Okay, repair the damages then.
Right. I believe that this reflects the lack of education or understanding of marriage, because as I was discussing with the psychologist, Dr. Daniel Solokovsky, in a previous video that I made months ago, that marriage was also a contract between individuals and society, meaning that it wasn't just two people making this covenant. It was sort of a covenant, a contract between them and society also, meaning that they are unavailable now. They have formed a family, and they're going to be out of other people's way. So I think that people have this very individualistic view on marriage, which also Peter Wright has been going over extensively in his writings as well. And also, too, is that what about the cases in which someone cannot prove actual transgressions, meaning that how could someone prove they're being abused if there's no physical evidence that one is being abused in the marriage? That is a common question that I've heard and read over and over again.
Right, and the very concept of abuse is very subjective. But Bay, you made a point about, I've forgotten what the point was you made. It was an important one that I wanted to line about
being trapped, or you can't accuse, you can never.
Oh yes, about being trapped. Nobody's saying that you can't leave a marriage. This is a phony objection. Nobody's saying you can't. Of course, anybody can walk out the door, and you can't stop someone from leaving the marriage physically. It's a matter of accepting the consequences for what you've done, as you say, in terms of any kind of civil contract. You can break the contract, you can break the covenant, but you accept the consequences for it.
Exactly.
You don't foist the consequences on the innocent party, the faithful party, and the church. I mean, the court certainly shouldn't be siding with the delinquent or offending party against the faithful party.
Right. That just shows how upside down this is. The person who is not at fault, who has made no transgression, is being punished in ways that are unbelievable. And I'm going to hold your book up here, Taken into Custody. Anybody who wants to go further into this matter should read Dr. Baskerville's book, Taken into Custody. It is an excellent book, and I have not read all the books dealing with this, but I've yet to come across a book or academician that challenges what is said in this book. Has anybody ever actually tried to challenge you?
No, they don't challenge any. I'd be interested in Bay's experience on that too. No, they never challenge us. They just ignore us. They don't like the judges in Jeff Morgan's case. They don't. They obviously don't rule against him because there's no ground. His case is airtight. There's no doubt about it. And everything in my book is unassailable, and everything the arguments that you make, Bay, are unassailable. They're irrefutable. So they don't. They never bother to refute what we say. They just ignore us and sweep it under the table.
Bradley, I wanted to answer your question about abuse, because the people who contact me, often they're saying, my wife says that I'm an emotional abuser. And my response back is, if you're so abusive and she's trying to say she has the upper hand, she's the person wrong in this situation, she would be doing everything she can to try to get you the right kind of help. She would say, let's go to this counselor, let's meet with this priest, let's go to this anger management, whatever it is. She would be begging and pleading to get the abuser to participate in some kind of help. But what I see is the reverse. Well, we went to one counseling session and she quit. She won't go back. She won't go. She refuses. Or she says, it will just never work. So, and if you were terribly abused, both the church and the state have mechanisms set up. You get out. You leave the house. You go to the police and you do a different kind of complaint. And it's not a divorce complaint where the judges believe everything and anything.
Okay. It's a criminal complaint. Yes, exactly. I mean, this is the word abuse, of course, is ambiguous, but the allegation of domestic violence, of course, which again, people argue that without no fault divorce, you'd have this epidemic of domestic violence. Well, you probably would have an epidemic of false domestic violence accusations. But as you say, domestic violence is a crime, and it should be adjudicated criminally, not in a civil marital case, family court. So there's these arguments are pretty much, well, they're entirely bogus.
Yes. And so can we say that the punishment for the person who is leaving with no transgression of the other spouse, can we just simply say that the punishment would be that that person leaves the marriage with nothing? Or, as you were saying before, Bay, restitution?
I mean, what is justice? If you look at the understanding of the two people going in, do they mean permanence? Do they expect to have two adults running a household, bringing in contributions, whether you're working or help doing chores or whatever, helping raising kids? If that's your expectation going in and one person walks out, they certainly shouldn't have the power to force those kids to have their lives turned upside down by going back and forth between two households. So that one, yeah. But then also what I call the material contribution. What were they contributing that's now gone, that's leaving these kids and the leftover spouse in a terrible way? So I would say there should be some restitution financially for a long time.
I agree with that. Mm-hmm. Yes. And
Bay, I want to go on, Bradley.
Oh, just one thing I wanted to touch upon also. There is a lot of talk about this in the men's content spaces online about let's say most of the time they are discussing, well, it's true. Most of the divorces involving children are initiated by women. What is it, 90+%, I believe, of the divorces involving children are initiated by women. And also, but I do think that some men are ignoring the women who have been left to no fault of their own either. For example, what happens when a woman has decided to be a full-time caregiver in the home and also has had if she did have a career, her career is on hold. Other issues with her furthering her education have been on hold also. So that is also a precarious position to be in when someone has no income, but has also been doing work, because homeschooling is work, taking care of a home is work. So can we say something about that as well?
Right?
I deal with these kind of women. I'm thinking of a lady in New Jersey. She and her husband were both civil lawyers when they got engaged and married. They have 3 kids. She put her career on hold. She dedicated herself to running a household while he was the one bringing in the money. Great. Okay. He wants his divorce. She was one of these people who did not want her kids to go back and forth between 2 households, and she ended up getting run over in the court. So she's totally at a disadvantage. I know other women where they do that thing, and the court expects you to go back and get work, and you're disadvantaged. But the heartache is that these women were firm believers in reorienting their whole life for the upbringing of children. They didn't want to be career women. They wanted to dedicate themselves to having their children have the most fulfilling upbringing as possible. They're the engaged moms. So to make them go back to work, it's a hurt to the children, and it's a hurt to the mom.
Yes.
You know,
Go ahead, Stephen.
it's just one more. It's just one more. Flagrant interference in someone's private life, the private lives of innocent people. And this is again, my complaint about no fault divorce is that not just no fault divorce, no fault justice of any kind, is that it gives the courts the power to punish innocent people. And that's in some ways the most serious charge against it. It allows courts to punish, government officials to punish innocent people. Now, you might not call it punishment, requiring someone to go back to work to support their children, or requiring someone to pay child support to support. They don't call it a punishment, right? But that's what it is. It is a punishment. Taking away somebody's children, that's not a punishment. It's the best interest of the child. But of course, it's a punishment, taking away somebody's children. So they interfere, they micromanage your private life from this point onward. But they don't call it punishments. They call it, the divorce settlement. Well, this is madness. This is sophistry. Taking away someone's children, emptying their bank account, forcing them to sell their house. This is not a punishment. It's just all in the best interest of the child. Of course, this is madness, and everyone knows it's madness. So, this again is what I say is the way that this simply debases the entire judiciary, debases our entire concept of justice, and no society can endure this forever. And I think we're getting to the point where, the chickens have come home to roost. These poisonous principles are spreading from the divorce system throughout the judiciary. They're enabling things like, injustice in the criminal courts, injustice in the probate courts, lawfare operations against, what we've seen in the last couple of years against public officials and against private citizens, innocent people being punished for political purposes. So, I think this is simply intolerable at this point.
I can't say that life is terrible for everyone. There has to be a hopeful side to this, because this is pretty a downer. This is a downer. So my hopeful side is that throughout history, societies have gone up and down and up and down, and there's no guarantee that United States is going to stay as it is. But like, society self-corrects,
yes,
essentially, or the moon and the stars are going to crash and the world's going to end. So my way to not grow into despair, because what you're saying about it is such a downer. It's like, what do I do? I don't know.
Okay. Well, sorry. Well, I don't want to say, I think this, the system can, creates seeds of its own destruction, and it will, people will wake up. And after all, we all know, the Christian God brings good out of evil. It's when things are the most evil that God acts, and we see his work. So I think, it's often when we are at the bottom of the dregs of our lives that we realize the need to repent. We don't repent when we're happy and everything's going well and our lives are prosperous. We repent when we're in the gutter and and our lives are going to pieces and we're on the edge of suicide. So this is when I think this is the way of the world, and we just have to have faith and act on that faith. That,
Act.
God will be with us. God will be, if we act against this, that God will be with us.
Yes, I agree with both of you on that. And well, I think this has been a productive discussion. And any one who wants to receive the best information on sexual politics should tune into our show and subscribe. And I thank you for being here. Thank you, Bay, and thank you, Dr. Baskerville.